What's up, everybody? Couch Mills here, coming at you with a brand new Overwatch video. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down the heavily requested Crosshair Overwatch guide. We're going to be breaking down some of the best crosses you could be using, some different examples depending on the type of role you are, and big mistakes that you could be making with your crosshair that might be preventing you from hitting a lot of your shots and carrying as a whole. So we're going to be breaking all that down, but go to the GameLeap website in the links down below for high quality specific Overwatch guides that you'll find over every single hero in the entire game. Do yourself a favor, go check it out right now if you want to surpass your limits and get better extremely quickly at Overwatch down below. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now, the first thing that we need to talk about is about the sizing of a crosshair. Some people are like, hey, a crosshair should be extremely small, and other people have bigger crosshairs. You see sometimes streamers have bigger crosshairs, and you're like, okay, how small can my crosshair be, or how small should it be? Well, in general, for most characters that require aim, you're gonna want to have a relatively small crosshair. Now, the reason that you do this is because crosshairs are all about the contrast when your crosshair actually hits an enemy target. So you know when that happens, you can see when that happens visually, and if you have a crosshair way too big, instead of actually going inside the target and you knowing when you're gonna hit your shot, it's gonna cover the target, and then you're gonna have to find the center point inside something you can't even see. Doesn't make a lot of sense, and it can be pretty difficult to say the least. Now that means if you're playing a character like Ana, you're playing a character like McCree, Widowmaker, Tracer, the list goes on and on when it comes to hit scan, which we've broken down multiple times, but basically just aim-oriented characters, you want to have a smaller relative crosshair, and I'm going to break down some more examples of what that means later on, but that's just a general rule of thumb. But there are some exceptions. There are the projectile exception, the tank exception, but basically it comes down to the no aim exception. For instance, there's a lot of high-level Junkrat players that have crosshairs thicker than your mother's, the size of Texas. They're freaking huge, and they basically cover up a giant percentage of the screen, but they don't need very precise contrast play because they are not directly aiming at any target. This is why characters that have weapons that have a lot of travel time, or characters that you don't necessarily have to aim with, these are characters that you could be a lot more liberal with how big your crosshair is going to be. I've seen far players that have bigger than average crosshairs. I've seen Junkrat, like I said, and then tanks in general. Reinhardt's going to have big crosshairs. Most tanks that don't require a lot of aim can, but it doesn't mean that you should have a big crosshair. I think that having a small crosshair on every single character is perfectly viable and fine, but if you personally like it, it's not going to hurt you nearly at all on those characters. But if you had a giant freaking crosshair on like McCree or Widowmaker, for example, that would be an active, huge detriment. Now, of course, some characters have like specialty crosshairs like Hanzo, where a lot of people prefer that because it actually kind of does a small little animation or movement while you're knocking the bow and you know when it's fully charged. If that's something that you prefer, that's perfectly acceptable. But a lot of other Hanzos, a lot of high-level Hanzos, when you get to GM+, they just have that static small crosshair, and we're going to be breaking some examples of those down in a second. Now, the next question that a lot of people have is, what should the color of my crosshair be? Now, we talked about contrast, which is just the difference between one color and the color behind it, right? That's the contrast between the two, and that's really easily identifiable, right? If you have a plain white piece of paper, but you draw a black dot, it's really easy to see that black dot, right? But if you had like a really, really light yellow dot, it would be pretty hard to see. So essentially, this should kind of help you visualize what type of color you should pick. You should not be trying to pick colors that are too dull or colors that can easily blend with the background. And I know that some maps are different colors, which could be a completely different discussion because, for example, in a game like Valorant, there are optimal color crosshairs depending on the map you play because of how different the colors are. But at the very least in Overwatch, we have more customizable options, and there are some crosshair colors that I think are pretty easy to see no matter what map you're on. Specifically, I like magenta, and I like the lime green, and I like the red. I think those are fine, but pretty much all the colors are viable in one way or another, especially if you start to customize it with an outline, a black outline. It makes it a lot easier to see, but you just want to make sure that it's as easy as possible to see. When you line it up with an enemy, you can easily differentiate your color from the enemy, and you know when your crosshair's over an enemy. Now, the next thing that we got to talk about are the different types of crosses that I would suggest. There is the dot or the cross. Now, there are other variations to this. Sometimes people have circles or circles with holes in them and things like that, but the go-to are either the dot or the cross, which is a cross with either a cross with a gap inside to where if an enemy head goes inside that gap, you can see it really easily because there will be the actual crosshair on all sides of their head, or you have it to where it's a cross and when enemy's head walks inside of it, the head will be peering out of the corners where all of them meet in the middle. Now, if you do have the cross with no gap, you typically want to have it pretty small so you don't actually overlap the entire head with where the actual lines intersect. And if you have one with the gap, you can have it a little bit bigger because you're just trying to create that little gap inside for where their heads will go into. And then, of course, a dot. You don't want to have a dot too big. Same concept with the cross. You just want to make it so it's inside someone's head, not overlapping it. Now, in addition to that, you want to make sure that the show accuracy is disabled like 99% of the time. Now, if you're learning and you're trying to figure out just how inaccurate you are when you start firing from different ranges or when you're moving or things like that, you can keep that show accuracy on, right? With a character like Tracer, for instance, I've seen even high-level players do that. But typically, you want to get a feel for how this is and then you want to turn it off because it's just more distraction. You want the raw input. You want to know what the recoil does automatically, and you just want to make sure that nothing is hindering you from your aim, nothing is hindering you from your point of view. So I would highly suggest turning that off. And then all the time with the actual crosshair you're seeing, you want your opacity to be maxed out. You just want it to be as bright, as colorful as possible, so it's as easy to distinguish from the background. We went over this multiple times in the video, but it's a really important point that we just reiterate over and over again because that's a lot of basically what choosing your crosshair is, right? As long as you follow a lot of these big rules, it's going to be really easy for you to find your perfect crosshair, even if it doesn't fit the mold that I have for you. The idea is to find one that you're comfortable with and that you can utilize basically on most characters. Now, last up, I wanted to show you some examples of some of the crosshairs that I've personally used. A lot of times I switch up my crosshair, if I'm being honest, mainly because all my accounts, each one of them has slightly variations in crosshair because I play different characters on them, and I don't really mind it too much. As long as the crosshair is kind of small, I'm perfectly fine with it. But typically, I would suggest just trying to find that perfect crosshair and then just sticking with it. So the first one we're going to show you is the cross that has an outline. It has a slight gap cross, and I'm going to show you exactly what you could do to make that crosshair here. I like this crosshair for a lot of hit scans. It's nice, it's small. It really almost never blends in with the background or the characters, and I think that this is a good color. Generally, most players pick this color, and I think it's probably one of the best. Now, that being said, I wanted to give an alternative, which is just simple. It's a red dot. Not very creative, right? It's just a freaking red dot. That's why when a lot of y'all were asking about, you know, a crosshair guide, I was like, all right, they're gonna think I'm an idiot. I'm just giving them a dot. But seriously, this one's good. A long time ago, when I was actually good at this game, I was climbing McCree to Grandmaster, and this is the crosshair I used. It worked perfectly fine. I don't think that I wouldn't have gotten Grandmaster with a different crosshair, as long as it was small, but it was just one that worked. It just worked. And like I said, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. As long as your crosshair isn't a really bad one, you're gonna be perfectly fine. And as long as you can actually see your targets, see your crosshair in relation to your targets, you're gonna be fine. So don't stress out about it too much. Try some of these, experiment with the colors, experiment with making it maybe a little bit bigger of a cross or a little bit smaller, gap, no gap, bigger dot, smaller dot. You could try all these different things, and at the end of the line, you're gonna be able to find whatever your favorite crosshair is. So definitely do that. And if you want to know more, we have more in-depth guides about topics like this on the GameLeap website down below. In-depth, advanced concepts, tips, and tricks, so much. You gotta go check it out right now. But thank you so much for coming by. I hope you enjoyed the video. That's all I got for you today. I love your face, and I'll see you tomorrow.